Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. This is our Twitch recap from our live stream last Wednesday, where we are continuing development on our base, our surface outpost for Mars. Very first step here was going to be readdress the Ascent stage, in that it was just it was just ugly. Let's just be real. It was real ugly. So first thing we're going to do is try to consolidate its form factor down a little bit, make it a little squatter, maybe not so awkwardly tall, and that means we have to place a core at the center because we're going to place our two Kerbal pods off to the side. Not exactly like this, but in some general sense, we'll tuck them in and up, and this way we can still get our 4 crew capacity. We still have a docking port that is down the center line of the spacecraft. We'll just kind of cheat this tank here into the center. That's going to give us a little rigidity and a base plate for which to build the engine thrust plate out of. We'll also include 2 side tanks to kind of make it not so side heavy and give us a better way to mount a thruster placement setup of some kind. And of course, these will primarily be our fuel tanks. We will probably be adding a little bit more life support. We've made an executive decision to go with the Asterisk 2 engines just because it uses nitrogen tetroxide and Aerozine 50, which is kind of our universal fuel type for everything in orbit of Mars, meaning that we could possibly refuel this and use it multiple times. If everything goes really well and we master targeted landings, we might be able to use it as a single stage ascent descent vehicle, in that it could fly down to the surface, refuel, take a crew back up to Harmonia Station, refuel, and rinse and repeat. That is highly prospective and is not the original intention of this particular design. Right now, we just want to focus on being able to get the 4 crew off of the station and back into orbit, provided that they have completed their task on the surface, which is to research all the things. Now, the big challenge here is going to be adequate thruster placement, considering it is weirdly symmetrical, or single axis symmetry instead of 2-axis symmetry. Means that thruster placement needs to be a little creative at some point. I do in fact open up RCS build aid and try to get things balanced. Not to very much avail. As you can see, we do have a little bit of a torque, about 2/10 of a kilonewton. We are able to work this down eventually, but I do spend far more time trying to balance the axes of motion on this thing than I think was really justified, considering a much simpler solution was almost always available, and honestly looks a little cleaner. But this is even worse. That's nearly half a kilonewton of torque. If we get into the pitch axis, we've almost got 2 kilonewtons of torque, which is hilarious for many, many reasons. But after a bit of struggle with thruster placement, we decided to just not go with the angled quad on these 2 side tanks, make sure they get all situated. But the form factor of an ascent stage like this is just slightly more pleasing, a little easier to work with, although it makes getting ingrace, exgrace a little more difficult, seeing as it will have to have 2 access points or 2 sets of ladders to get in, instead of just the 1 like our old lander. But that is really kind of a marginal problem, considering the footprint of the base. It's not that hard, really, to get some ladders set up. So we'll just go for a little bit of fit and finish. We'll get some solar panels on here, and with 5,500 meters per second of delta V, this thing will have more than enough runtime to get itself off the surface of Mars and into orbit. We are just going to add another smaller tank here, make that one service module, so it's pressurized. All the other tanks will be balloon, and then we can reattach the base, and we're going to have to readjust these engines because they are definitely clipping in, although it does give us a much lower form factor and profile than before, which is excellent. still clipping in, however, so I don't know if there's going to be a good way to make them not clip into the engine bells, but we might be just about close enough. So let's get it outside, do a test run. Alright, yep, do a little wiggle woggle, that's alright. Throttle is set to full. Okay, nothing exploded. I mean, yet. Things are obviously about to explode. Oh no, we will... Vapor and feed lines, engine shut down. Bummer. 0 explosions. Alright. But it did separate clean. Convert to VAB. And back inside, we will add a few struts for rigidity. Saw those crew cabins kind of wobbling around because they're basically attached only through that octagonal strut, which is not the most rigid of attachments. We should probably give it some comms just to make sure. And we're just going to try to tuck these engines out a little bit because they are clipping into one another. It just isn't quite fair, and turns out the best solution to this is to lower the bay, or lower the science lab. Anyway, we're going to have to get some ladders attached to things, and that's just the dumb way to do it. We should put them on the lab itself so that we're not trying to haul the massive useless ladders up into orbit with us. Now I will scroll around for a million years trying to find the correct ladder, angle it, and hope that that's just about good enough. We'll do the same thing over here, and take a good look around. Looks like it might work. We're hoping, but we're going to have to do an outside test with this, so we'll load some crew on board and maybe put some landing legs on this thing so it doesn't topple around. That would be terrible. But then let's get it outside and let's make this test run happen. Alright. Bounce. Physics. Good. EVA. And will he change ladders? Yes. Will he change ladders again? Almost. Let go. Grab. That worked real well. Good job. Oh, get up. This live stream typically will run till about 7:30 p.m. my time. They typically go about an hour and a half. So we got about another hour to go. Oh, perfect. He laddered like a pro. Expert laddering. Until you try to... I don't know. I guess if you're going down, it matters a lot less. Take a little walk around our base. Oh. I guess, yeah, we'll have to drop down. Can't get to it from this side. Uh-oh. He's a little too short. Oh, good. Alright, well. Nope. Let's go this way. Pull the gear in. Hey, nothing exploded. That's new. Sorry to disappoint. Grab. Excellent. Come on. Get there. Get there. Oh, hey, we got the board icon. Nope, can't board. It's full. That's cool. All the ladders, I mean, we can probably angle this one back just a little bit, but all the ladders work. Hooray! Alright. Revert. VAB. And once back inside, we focused our attention very briefly on, well, first making these small adjustments to the ladders that we could make sure that the crew could leave and come back. And we turned our attention very briefly to deciding how much room we have for our rover section, which will park very nicely over here. And it looks like about 4 by 2 is about the footprint we can afford, although it was suggested that if we just put the rover plate on a hinge and tilted it up, we could expand that footprint out considerably, seeing as how we're going to need a ramp to drive it up and down off of the base anyway. Primary focus of the rover was twofold. It was to, one, be able to take science equipment or science experiments out to a separate biome and perform more experiments and bring more data back for the surface lab to research, and two, to collect resupply pods. As it sits, this base has about a 1-year duration on the surface, which is, I mean, it seems like a long time, but it's probably not nearly long enough to get all the research done that this facility would be able to accomplish. And we would like to be able to extend its service life, if at all possible, indefinitely, maybe. And considering we don't really have the ability to make targeted landings on the surface of Mars, the idea was to land small resupply drops, retrieve them with a rover, and then drive them back to the base itself to replenish life support supplies, which I think is our most functional idea at this particular moment, until at least we figure out a much better way to land much heavier things with much more accuracy on the base itself. So right now I'm just kind of figuring out where we can put a loading ramp for said rover. This is pretty much just a placeholder. It's an idea, something to give me an idea of scale, more than it is to perform as an actual functional ramp. We'll probably be paying much more attention to those details a whole lot later. But for right now, I just wanted to get an idea of size. And yeah, when built like this, we could probably go to 4 panels, maybe 5 panels long, and 3 panels across, if you assume that one of those is a meter, which I'm not really sure what the conversion is here for realism overhaul, or if that analysis is even accurate. But before we jump over to the spaceplane hangar, I just wanted to see about how many Astros engines and on what size tank we would need to get a suitable descent burn. Now, this is assuming that we only need these engines for a descent stage. And it's really a lot fewer than I thought it would. And again, these engines are not angled appropriately. Some of them are facing out by about a degree or so, which does lower their available delta V over there on our delta V map. But turns out we're in a lot better shape than I thought we were, considering the tonnage. But there's no real point in addressing the engine problem just yet, as we are not yet at our full tonnage. So we will jump over into the spaceplane hangar and start plotting out a rover. Now, my initial thought was to make one rover that could do both functions of the rover situation equally well, which means it would have to be crewed, so that we could take hopefully a scientist and maybe an engineer out across the surface, run science experiments, clear the data, move to the next biome, run science, clear the data, and then bring it all back to the lab for processing. Or even transmit one version home, collect another version to bring back to the lab. So working within our footprint of 4x2 or 4x3 doesn't give us a whole lot of room. I guess I had never actually realized exactly how big these rovers can be. But yeah, they size up pretty quick. And just again, using my measuring stick rather ineffectively here, I guess I should have just left that thing built and put it off to the side. That would have been a much more constructive use of my time. And then the big ruggedized wheels, because they, I don't know, they're ruggedized. They're also pretty fast, and they can keep us from flipping. And hopefully they won't break as easy. But we'll try to get just a basic wheelbase figured out, and then make sure that this works. There is a huge problem with wheel clipping that I will demonstrate shortly now. Whoa. That was certainly uncalled for. Oh yeah, see, front wheel's not spinning. They're clipped into the cockpit too much. They will not operate. Good to know. Spaceplane hangar. Yeah, it turns out these wheels are extra sensitive to anything being clipped into them at all. And unlike the other rubberized wheels that have a much smaller mount point, these have quite a broad one, which means it's a lot more delicate on where we can put things, and they do soak up a lot of our available space with that very wide mount point that they have. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like I can move them any further forward. And if we want to be able to avoid rolling this thing at all, we would like a nice, very low center of gravity. But you can see already that the amount of useful space left to us on this rover is almost slim to none. Especially if we have to have the core because there's no avionics in that cockpit. It will offer us nothing. So we would not have the option to operate this rover in autonomous mode should we ever need to. But to try to bring down our center of gravity a little bit, we're going to attach these two procedural tanks to the side, make them much, much, much smaller, make them light cylinders, and make them full of battery. Battery is pretty dense. This will have a lot of charge. Unfortunately, the electrical propulsion tank doesn't automatically fill it with battery, so we'll just switch it back down to service module, open up the UI, and eventually scroll all the way to the bottom where there's electric charge. Boom. Done here. We'll go ahead and up the utilization because it's just a battery, maybe even lithium ion, although I doubt it. Those aren't really safe for space travel or something. You puncture them, they burn real bad, which is why. But that didn't move our center of mass a whole lot, and we still have a lot of equipment that we need to fit onto this thing, like a truck bed, a means for attaching and collecting resupply pods, all the scientific equipment that we can wedge onto it. We may have bitten off a little bit more than we can chew in trying to do this with a single rover. Anyway, we're going to try to adjust the wheelbase by rerouting a part, which I'm notoriously very bad at. And yeah, that'll that'll go well. But it's still not giving me quite the clearances that I would like, so eventually we'll just go back to our original route and maybe just detach and reattach the entire assembly, which would probably be the smarter way to go about things. Yeah, still won't let that go much further forward. Well, basically, we'll have to unbolt it entirely and bolt it back on again if we want to get, I guess, the clearance we want. But I don't want to give up too much of that space towards the back. But let's see if these are going to work while being clipped just a little. Whoa, come on. That was entirely uncalled for. Why is your... What in the hell happened? Yeah. Okay, then. Huh. Attached to rover makes the most sense. Simulation gaming, yes. Well, it'll drive in, it'll do donuts real well. The answer is no. So we'll get back into the VAB and we'll just try to reassess our situation here. Basically, we will try to reattach the long end up front and maybe the short end up back. There, all the wheels completely untouched. Nothing clipping into anything, which is fantastic. Although I did ponder these wheel trucks, even attached one, just to see what kind of clearances we were looking at, which caused the game to crash, predictably. So we'll get things reloaded. We'll get back into the spaceplane hangar. This is our design almost as we left it. Instead of rebuilding it, we'll just take it off and turn it around. Okay, render. Alright. We're going. Perfect. And it's rather hard to flip even here on Earth. Means it'll be pretty easy to flip on Mars. I had a Nissan that drove like this once. Backwards. SSTO/SKS plus LE. Oh. Okay, this is interesting. that worked real well. All right, spaceplane hangar. Well, we have a small idea of how fast it'll go. Now we just want to see if we can get that center of gravity just a little bit lower and without being ridiculous on the clipping. But it looks like we can get that rail right through the center without interfering with things too much. So we just need to make sure that the batteries are tucked in. I would like to take a film canister out with us, but I don't think this is going to work. Nope. Rear wheel's locked. Dang it. All right. That's a problem. Yeah. So that already eliminates one of the most science profitable experiments from being able to be carried on this thing, which upsets me quite a bit. So we're just going to try to rearrange things just a little bit. Like I said, I would like a lot of room there on the back half of this utility rover for utility reasons. But getting that extra clearance just isn't going to be very friendly to us. Although we could mount things like this. The design of it really isn't quite working out for me. So we're pretty much back to square one and trying to get as much clearance around those wheels as we can. Now, not my favorite, realistically. So it turned out that design just did not have the avionics even to pull the wheels around. This RoveMate thing has about 2 tons of avionics it can work with, so it's a much better option, provided, of course, we can get it all sized in here appropriately. And it does give us a little bit more room, although it is clipping into the back wheels. So we're going to try to play with the angle on things. We don't need these batteries anymore because the RoveMate core has plenty of batteries all on its own. It's just a matter of figuring out the correct way to place it and hopefully having some kind of useful truck bed for it. And then we'll take it outside. It works. All the wheels spin. Just a quick double check of that. But it is ugly and eliminates most of its useful cargo space all on its own, which is upsetting a little bit. So that kind of to square one, as we're just trying to approach this problem in maybe a different way. We'll tuck the RoveMate core there on the bottom. We'll attach the wheels there. This is probably a much smarter way to have approached the problem. We can keep our center of mass very low with the weight of that battery, and it does give us lots of extra room and all the core tonnage we need. So let's get it outside and see how well it works. Oh, come on. One more again, KSP. I love how it still charges me 200 credits for every one of these simulations. Don't you dare! Don't you dare! Well, that was fortunate. Yeah. And it looks like all of our wheels work. Although the controls are backwards? Pigeon on a chair.
What's going on?
How's it going, Pigeon on a chair? Thank you. Thank you for your 73 bits. Much appreciated. That's awesome. And why is our ride height so screwy? Was it like this when we were in the spaceplane hangar? And why is the control facing the sky? I guess it's trying to control from here because we don't have a Kerbal. That's interesting. But hey, the wheels, they work. We'll just put a small core on there. Yeah, so after like an hour, we finally have wheels that work and maybe a bit of usable cargo space in the back. So we will run with it very happily and try to build on a useful truck bed that maybe we can haul supplies with. Although this was my original intention, to be able to reattach this rover to the base, was to include some sort of docking port because it would be a little easier. And, well, the clipping again with the clipping. I think we're going to have to scratch this design off and start fresh. So we're actually moving into footage captured after the live stream because I got kind of a bug up my butt about wanting to make something that's useful. And I came to the conclusion that we're probably going to have to build 2 rovers. One for collecting scientific data and equipment, and an automated only rover for collecting resupply pods. And seeing as how the mission longevity depends more on getting resupplies than it does on collecting more data, we can always get more data to it by use of automated drones or dropships, or even crates that carry scientific equipment that can be attached to other things, like this drone. It would just take more trips with said drone. The ability to resupply the base is by far a higher priority, so we're going to work on that problem first. And we're going to do so by building out a very lightweight, very basic resupply truck. But we need a way to pick up resupply pods, which have not yet been designed, so we've got a lot of liberties that we can work with there. But I did try a crane design, basically by repurposing the disposal unit that is in service on the moon currently, but it has a very low weight limit on the amount of tonnage it can pick up. It's about, I want to say, 3/4 of a ton or so before it just breaks the electromagnet off the crane arm. And 3/4 of a ton of life support supplies will last a crew of 4, roughly 10 days. I have absolutely no interest in resupplying them 10 days at a time. That's going to be super tedious. Although I know that there's going to be a tonnage restriction on absolutely any resupply, anything that we send out. But I did come up with this. With only a single hinge point, it's going to be a lot stronger. It's going to be able to lift a little bit more tonnage. That's the plan anyway. So with this thing out on the runway, we will just articulate up and down, make sure this thing can lift this prototype resupply thing that we're obviously going to size up. If we undock it, we just can't quite get low enough to get a solid dock. So we'll get it back into the VAB. We will reposition that gantry rail just a little bit, and then see how low it can go. And that does look like it's getting just a little below the wheelbase in total, which is fine. We just want to make sure this system can work. So we'll get it back outside, and of course it flips and something explodes, but when we move the gantry rail, it seems to snap back up. That's excellent. And yeah, we are dragging the gantry rail a little, but we undock our test cargo, and we can redock it and move it around. That's a success. That's the first time we've been able to pick up something quite this heavy, and we can also drive around with it, even with it up so high. Yeah, that was bound to happen. Anyway, so now we're going to work on some fit and finish improvements to this design, and step 1 is to make it so that we can belly this thing out without risking our robotic parts. And the best way to do that is with hinges, so that we can retract the wheels and move them up out of the way. This will also help us fit this thing into a little bit of a tighter space for transport, because it won't have quite as big of a footprint when we have it attached to our base module. Also a little bit wider of a wheelbase, making it a little harder to flip, but we do need to isolate our 2 robotic groups. We'll have to set maximums on the hinges, but we can worry about that a little bit later. And also some skid plates down here to make sure we're not dragging on the base of the wheel hinges. And I don't know, my initial idea to have that docking port at the front kind of means that the rover can't go anywhere while one of these resupply pods are in use, and that's kind of useless. So maybe if our drop pods just had 2 docking ports, we could drive up, attach the resupply pod, and then undock the rover, and it could go out and retrieve another one. And yeah, I guess what happens when you don't reset the force percent on a decoupler, it blows up your test rig that you're going to try to use to make sure that you could redock this thing. But we can still actually perform this test. We just will push our test dummy along, flatten out our wheelbase, and we get a solid dock. That's pretty awesome. when we're still obviously nowhere near our maximum tonnage, but just to make sure, we'll belly ourselves out. Hard dock complete. That's awesome. That works pretty well. And we can still belly this up and put it in a stowable configuration. So far, so good. Back in the spaceplane hangar, we can just make a little bit of trim, fit, and finish improvements. Namely, we should probably put some RTGs on this thing so that it can operate in all conditions, nighttime especially, without having to worry about solar panels charging. We're going to have to give it independent comms, because if we lose signal, it kind of becomes useless, especially with the docking ports being subject to signal delay through remote tech. So, I mean, really, depending on what satellite it connects to, we're looking at anywhere between a 6 and 15-minute signal delay on docking ports. Of course, that'll only matter for releasing a docking port, not necessarily attaching one. That should happen instantly, we hope. Obviously, we'll get some headlights bolted on here, and in lieu of the docking port that did take up the front, we will just instead put on a nice, very large battery. Of course, the Rove Mate already has a big battery, but why not? It'll help with our center of mass, and it helps it look not like crap, which is very, very good indeed. So I did do further testing that was off camera, but basically we got the test weight resupply pod up to about 2 tons, which gives about a 30-day supply to the 4 crew that will be inhabiting the station, which is kind of the bottom end of what I was looking for, but we'll test with that and move on from there. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.